All right, everyone. We are starting the March 18th Finance Committee meeting. We have with us the town manager and our two deputy town managers. Welcome. I appreciate you all coming. So this is the plan for tonight. We will start by going through the warrant and ask any questions we have about the warrant articles. Ask the manager and the deputies. Then we will talk about where we are year to date with expenses, and then I'll open it up for any additional questions that people want to throw their way. Then we'll get on to other business. All right. So with that, I will just start going through the warrant. Does everyone have the warrant available? So some of these things we know nothing about, so we don't even know whether we care about them. So
fair enough.
That's part of the reason you're here. So we'll start with Article 8, right? Regulation of outdoor lighting. And what can you tell us about that? And we're particularly interested in financial impact, if there is one. So
sure. It's a fair question. I'm glad you asked it, because I do think there's going to be a fairly significant financial impact to this article. And I'll admit that that information wasn't available at the time that the select board had their warrant article hearing for this particular matter. So it is information that we were preparing today and that I will subsequently share with them as well as you this evening. But what I would say from the top is we do currently have a bylaw that regulates outdoor lighting. We have for a number of years. I think, as I understand from David Morgan, who submitted this on behalf of the Department of Planning and Community Development, this is to sort of replace our existing bylaw with what is called a dark skies compliant bylaw. There's a dark skies organization. They offer a model bylaw that has been adopted by a number of municipalities. I'll admit I'm not well versed enough to know like what brought upon this bylaw, if there is any particular issues or problems that are trying to be solved. But I would say that our existing bylaw, which has been on the books for a number of years to control light pollution, has not presented much in the way of a workload. We get roughly 3 to 6 complaints annually that we inspect through inspectional services, and based on the inspector's judgment, they make an evaluation whether or not they think that there's too much spillover or light pollution on a neighboring abutter, and they order it to be addressed. The bylaw as proposed, this dark skies bylaw, is far more complicated in terms of the inspections and analyses that it requires. But I think the part that may be most concerning to me is that it calls for a lighting plan submission and review for large renovation projects and other permitted projects. So when sharing the language with inspectional services, we started to think through like what might be some of the costs associated with this. And they arrived at an estimate of this probably being applicable to 150 projects annually. So if we assumed that even at a 30-minute workload per plan review, it's at least an additional 75 hours of workload per year. And interestingly, with a bylaw like this, it's the case that final inspections would need to be covered or conducted at night, which regrettably would require overtime in nearly every instance. And with respect to the inspectors in that unit, after hours, if we bring them in for one inspection, it's 4 hours. And if you assume a $50 an hour base rate, that would be a $75 overtime rate times 4, or sort of $300 cost to the town per inspection. So if you couldn't, do those in a back-to-back fashion because you don't know when you're going to get permits, like sort of the worst case scenario, just in terms of overtime personnel costs would come out to be roughly $45,000 a year. We would certainly have to invest in some equipment. We would need at least 2 lux meters that are roughly $3,000 per unit, and we need to be calibrated annually at about $300 a pop. We would also need to train at least a few inspectors to get the necessary expertise. This bylaw is written in a fairly technical and complicated manner. So based on our research, we would assume that it would be at least $1,500 per person to get the necessary expertise to be able to enforce this. There's a lot of complicated calculations, and it's not something that we've been charged with doing before. It is generally like you go out there and you make a sort of assessment from the public right away as to whether or not something has tripped over the line of being reasonable, and we will just send a letter and order someone to correct it. And this bylaw, if you've seen the main motion language, is very prescriptive in its thresholds or standards. So in those instances, we would reasonably expect that obviously our residents are going to invariably download light meter apps and various things to make assessments on their own. And when that happens, it tends to generate more complaints. So the issue with the way it's written is like it's something we would have to be measuring from at property boundaries, likely at private property boundaries. So we would need permission to enter upon private property, whereas our assessments now can be done from what we call plain sight or plain view, which is from the public right of way. So that would be just one other wrinkle that we would have to contemplate if this moved forward. But that's sort of the preliminary assessment of what the costs would be to the town if this passed.
And this is not required. We are not required to do this.
No.
And we're not foreseeing being required to do this.
That's my knowledge.
And is the Department of Planning and Community Development offering to pay for this out of their budget?
They are not.
What were they thinking with this warrant?
I think that's a fair question, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Morgan or the Department of Planning and Community Development, but I think some of the justification that they offered was done during the warrant article hearing in front of the select board, and I would encourage folks to watch that. But admittedly, from my perspective, I didn't have this information available to provide a full picture of the potential implications of this warrant article, so I will be passing that on to the select board as well as you folks.
Alan.
So have the selectmen taken a position yet?
They initially did, and it was a positive action. They have not finalized their votes yet.
And has Belmont, Cambridge, Somerville, Medford, or Winchester approved this?
I do know
Something like this?
I do know a number of communities have adopted this model bylaw. I'm not familiar with which ones. So.
Okay, because if they haven't done it,
Yeah.
it's almost irrelevant for us.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I realize inspections in response to a complaint would be a different thing, but the inspections that go along with a permit from a addition or a new building, is there a way that you could add the $600 or something? Can you add that to the permit fee if that's the administrative cost of the town of the permit?
Yeah, we could consider instituting a fee in an attempt to cover costs associated with this.
Thank you.
Paul?
Another question that came up with a couple of departments that our group looks at.
Paul, could you talk a little bit louder, please?
Will it affect facilities, because facilities will have to get better lighting to comply with this?
So existing lighting would be grandfathered for I think 10 years under this proposal. Again, I didn't draft it. At the warrant article hearing, it was the first time I had seen the language, and I did did argue for an exemption for lighting within the public right-of-way to protect the town's interests with respect to streetlights and pedestrian scale lighting. But beyond that, building lighting would be covered and it would need to be compliant at the time of replacement.
Charlie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What happens in the wintertime when the ground is covered with snow? In other words, you have one condition in the summertime, light comes down, it gets absorbed, and in the wintertime, it's reflected all over the place.
That is beyond my expertise.
Other questions?
Hence, training our inspectors.
Yeah. Sophie?
Would this come into effect immediately, or is there language in there delaying the time, giving us a few years before it is implemented?
It would take effect with immediacy for new installations and new projects.
Other questions? All right, let's go on to the next one. This Article 16. 16? Yep.
Fees and charges?
So Articles 16, 17, and 19 were all inserted into the warrant at my request. They're all inherently linked as they all relate to fees. And the pursuit of these warrant articles is an effort born out of our long-range planning committee process, where the cycle this year is a committee. Obviously, we want to consider every avenue to reduce the ask or the amount of the override in an effort to mitigate impact on the taxpayers. So permit and license fees are local receipts, which is a revenue source that we have a higher degree of control over than most. In one of which that we chose to estimate more aggressively this cycle. So during the long-range planning process, and as we estimated our local receipts more aggressively, we decided it was necessary, and I know I actually spoke with Mr. Tosti about this, to review our fees comprehensively in an effort to increase our existing non-tax revenues. So this led to Article 16, and it also aligns with the Select Board's stated override commitment to pursue new revenue sources or identify ways to increase existing revenue sources. And we'll note that, and this is sort of the legal disclaimer, that fees and charges are not collected solely to raise revenues, but they're there to keep pace with costs to adequately compensate the town for providing services as a governmental entity for the expenses we incur for providing the service to the individuals using or benefiting from that service. So the fee, all that to say, the fees have to be reasonable. We can't, put them through the roof to try to close, some budgetary deficit. So in our research, we learned such an effort was long overdue. Many of our fees have not been adjusted for decades. In some instances, obviously that does not align with the ever increasing costs of providing services over time. So in reviewing the best way to do this, we learned many of the fees are prescribed in Title IX, Article 3 of the town's bylaws. They list them by department and by service provided. So interestingly, our evaluation showed that some of the fees as published are accurate to what's being charged today, while there have been others that haven't been updated within the bylaw to reflect changes to those fees that have been implemented over time, over the course of decades in some instances. And in other instances, actually in a number of instances, there have been new fees added in accordance with newly adopted bylaws, but that were never incorporated into this particular bylaw, which is supposed to document our fees. So the bylaw amendment that we're proposing under Article 16 is seeking to reconcile Title IX, Article 3, to capture missing fees, to match current fees, and to codify newly proposed fees. And in all instances, the bylaw would need amendment. So we looked at with the department head team, this effort was led by Christine, to sort of evaluate where we stood. We certainly took a look at all of our neighboring communities to ensure the fees we're proposing weren't gonna land Arlington in somewhere that was an outlier of sorts. So that led to, there will be a sort of full table with marked up changes that show those values. Ultimately, what we would expect, to cut to the chase, is some, reasonable increases to all of our existing fees, but based on the number of fees we charge and the number of permits and licenses issued, we would expect this to generate on the order of magnitude of at least an additional $100,000 annually in revenue. I'll admit in 16 and 17, obviously we'll go from one to the other, should be taken together because completing this exercise highlighted some of the inherent difficulties with codifying fees within a bylaw. So obviously, as I mentioned, there were instances over the past 2 to 3 decades where fees were changed, but the corresponding changes to the bylaw were not necessarily codified. And there have been instances in a number of times where newly instituted fees have not been added to the bylaw. So this may have been an oversight. We also believe that there was, at least various points in time, there were certain officials that believed they had the authority to change fees outside of the bylaw, and that those authorities had been vested in others. Ultimately, based on our research, we found that there is a very popular local option statute, which follows in in Article 17, that would permit the boards or officers empowered to issue a specific permit or license to set and amend the associated fees. So that's what is contemplated by Article 17, which is the adoption of Chapter 40, Section 22F. It is certainly, like I said, clear that prior officials believed there was authority to amend fees outside of town meeting, as was done from time to time. However, our research on the prior acceptance of Chapter 40, Section 22F was inconclusive. There are certainly references made in official documents, including Finance Committee reports to town meeting, as well as other bylaws subsequently approved by town meeting that intimate or reference this local adoption or the fee setting process that it persists, but was not able to locate anything that definitively codified Arlington as a town pursuing that local option. So since, meanwhile, we're looking to holistically update our fees in Article 16, it was my preference to sort of remove any doubt about the acceptance of the local option previously through a very distinct warrant article, number 17. And if approved, we would then have clear documented approval through the Attorney General's office. So this is, again, a statutory provision that would allow any municipal boards or officers to establish reasonable fees for their permits, licenses, or certificates that they issue, or for any work or services that they perform. The fees would then be subject to approval by the appointing authorities, including the town manager and select board. So a individual body can set the fees, but there would still be a layered approval process on top of it. So if we envision town meeting, or if we were to pass Article 16 and reset the table of fees and codify that, and then this warrant article were to also pass, that existing schedule of fees and charges will remain in effect until any new fees and charges are adopted by any of the boards or commissions that are set to prescribe them. And then the fee reference could be subsequently removed from the bylaw at a future town meeting, or we could simply add a note to our bylaw that fees and charges are now subject to change per the presiding board or officer as of the date of adoption of Chapter 40, Section 22F. So ultimately what's being pursued under Article 17 is placing the responsibility for updating and amending fees on a more regular basis in the hands of those persons providing for that service. So my hope is that we would be able to more nimbly and regularly update our fees to be commensurate with the increased cost of providing whatever service it may be. So while we look at a number of fees, the one fee that I would note that would have the most significant impact on our local receipts is that associated with building permits, wiring, and plumbing permits. However, we're not proposing to adjust any of those fees. It seems we are still, even though those fees have been the way they are for well over a decade, they are still commensurate with our surrounding communities. But the way those function is a fee per value of construction, right? It's, per $1,000 of construction. So that local receipt or revenue source has been increasing steadily as construction costs have increased. So there really isn't the justification to change the fees that may have the most impact on our budget, but there is clear justification for increasing for liquor licenses, food permits, birth certificates, a number of things. There's a whole laundry list of them that we propose some very modest increases to, but the ones that we wouldn't touch are frankly the ones that generate the most revenue currently.
And Article 19?
And 19 is something that we're looking, it's already on the books. What we're looking to do is add additional citations that, if unpaid, could be leaned over to real estate tax bills. Obviously, as a community, we've passed a number of bylaws that require enforcement by the community. Take gas-powered leaf blowers, for example, or the tree bylaw. There are a number of things that could result in violations. If you've been familiar, if you've ever had an off-leash dog violation or something, you get issued a citation, like a ticket. And that is called non-criminal disposition. Turns out if you don't pay that ticket, by and large, nothing happens. So the clerk notified us that there's a very large town hall of a bunch of unpaid tickets. And as we thought, geez, how can we, as we look to scrounge everywhere we can for revenues, we looked at, okay, well, why don't we capture some of those bylaw violations that we spend the time and resources to enforce, to incorporate them into this bylaw. Admittedly, many of the citations are $20 or $25. So why, when someone doesn't pay the ticket through the non-criminal disposition process, our recourse is to send town council to district court to pursue a criminal complaint. That juice is not worth the squeeze for $20, right? Like it just doesn't make sense for us to pursue that for a leaf blower violation. So we thought, like, well, we want there to be repercussions for violating the bylaw. We want, if we issue a citation, for it to mean something. So we thought, well, this would be another way that if someone doesn't proactively pay their ticket and they didn't appeal it and win an appeal, that it could be leaned over, as some existing violations can be now. I know Julie had done some research on some of the ones that exist now, but also some of the ones we were considering putting before town meeting for consideration.
Yeah, I mean, right now, as Jim was saying, the clerk has a whole pile of them. Just going through some of the items that they've got in their drawer: dog citations, dumpsters, snow removal, unlicensed kennel, leaf blowers, the dark skies. So just building off of what Jim was already saying about that potential warrant article, right now we've got some dark skies, tickets that maybe are going on, paid currently. So maybe just enforcing what we've got in the books currently would work. Other zoning issues, sanitation fees. So there are a couple of communities in Massachusetts that are currently doing this. And so these are just some examples that they're using, but these are ones that we're seeing that are currently going unpaid. In the treasurer's office, when we were not in doing as much enforcement around parking, we saw a number of parking tickets going unpaid. That
I
was.
paid all of mine.
Yeah.
I did.
Turns out you didn't have to.
Yeah, we appreciate your donation though.
Now you do. We'll mark you at the register.
And now that we are marking people, people are paying their tickets. So just, anecdotally, it does seem that it could have a good impact were we to be, enforcing some of these fees that we are, as Jim said, spending the time to impose.
So those are sort of, it was like a package deal that we proposed of trying to find additional non-tax revenues, obviously to support the budget moving forward.
So 16 is to increase specific fees. Do you have or will you have a schedule of what those amounts will
We
be?
do, it'll be available on Friday.
Okay.
We can
And-
send that along.
And 17 is to make clear how fees in the future can be raised
Yeah.
more readily.
Correct.
And 19 is enforcement of those fees.
Leaning them to real estate.
And the one thing I will add, because it's not it wouldn't be covered by Article 16, is the thing that would also sort of generate a good amount of revenue would be for parking violations. That is not codified in our bylaw. We're probably one of the very few communities remaining that still only charge $15 for a parking violation. They are largely $25 really anywhere you go, and we're low on some other parking violations. Those things live in the traffic rules and orders and are subject to approval by the select board, as they are the sort of arbiters of parking rules and orders. So that's something going to be presented to them and ask them to consider as well, because that is an area where I think we are particularly low. It's not something we've contemplated again for decades, and especially we now have an overnight parking permit program. We should be trying to get people into that program, then instead of having it be cheaper just to get a couple violations per year at $15. So that's something we're going to contemplate as well, but it's not considered as part of this warrant article because they're not codified in the bylaws. But that is an area where I think there is probably some revenue to be generated in a reasonable manner.
Michael?
You mentioned you weren't going to look at changing the present schedule of fees for building permits because those follow the value of the work that's being done, and that's subject to the market. And so that information is collected at the time of the application for the permit, what the value of the work is?
Yes, it is calculated at that time. So they give a projected total cost, and OpenGov will specifically calculate the value of that permit. It's done similarly for electric, gas, plumbing, and building, and then it will tack on. If you're going to get a dumpster, it's this much, and for the ultimate certificate of occupancy, it's going to be this much. There are line item fees that get added, but it calculates specifically the building permit value based on the dollar value proposed of the work. And as we've learned with some of our large projects, something that we've implemented is we actually require an affidavit at time of certificate of occupancy to reevaluate what the cost of the work is. I mean, as we see with municipal projects, you have a base bid.
The work might have been underbid for the purposes of getting the permit?
Yeah, or that there was a bunch of change orders and you ended up spending a whole lot more money than you expected. So we've instituted an affidavit process to try to reconcile project costs from start to end in case there was a discrepancy, because a lot of the mixed-use developments end up being subject to various changes throughout the process, and things may vary considerably. So we're trying to hone in on any of those changes as well to make sure we're not being shortchanged.
Josh?
I don't know if I've ever asked this before, but I assume we don't have any jurisdiction over the dollar amount of excise fees for automobiles?
That is something that has been contemplated as part of the last two municipal empowerment acts that were filed, but it is unlikely to make it through the legislature.
I would think that's one of the most significant revenue.
It absolutely is.
And for Article 19, if someone was not a homeowner, then there's no recourse in that situation.
I mean, if whoever the homeowner is could probably be lien, because whoever the homeowner is probably who the citation was gonna be issued to.
For like an off leash or that kind of thing would be a.
We wouldn't be issuing for off leash on private property.
But snow removal, right, snow removal.
Yeah. Or gas powered leaf blower violations. Yeah, off leash dogs, right, we will issue citations to non-residents. This would be no recourse for us, so we're gonna have to use the traditional avenues.
Charlie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I gather from your comment before, in answer to what Christine said, that you are gonna provide a full schedule of these fees to town meeting.
Correct.
So, but there's then the possibility under Article 17 to change those fees in the future without going back to town meeting.
Correct.
So what is the avenue of redress if a citizen opposes a certain fee? You know, snow removal or something, I don't know. But how do they object to that, and how does it get adjudicated?
So if you receive a citation for a bylaw violation, you get a ticket, there's a box to appeal, you have to file that appeal within 21 days, and you actually get a hearing with the clerk magistrate if you wish to contest a violation that you were issued. If you're talking about like a permit fee, right, if we set like, okay, a category 1 food establishment is gonna cost $100, suppose your recourse would be to challenge the entity setting that fee, but if afforded the opportunity, that entity then sets the fee, it would have to be approved by the manager's office as well as the select board's office. So really you could go to any one of those entities and challenge and say, geez, I don't think the fee you've established is reasonable on the following basis. So, you know, it perhaps would provide an avenue, otherwise,
State
you know,
court, or
what's that?
is there a legal path to object to such a fee?
Yeah, I mean, there is a whole bunch of case law surrounding municipal fees because people have challenged them.
Yes.
So that can be done.
So there's a way to do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Alan Jones?
Thank you. Does this have any impact on school and recreation fees? I guess particularly 17. I'm not sure how they're set or collected.
No.
It's just town fees.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess the other is just a comment for town meeting, will you have like at least a summary of all of the unpaid fees and fines, just so town meeting members can have an idea of what, you know. what we're
Meaning
talking
the
about.
categories.
Well, just the exact numbers, or $500,000 worth of outstanding fees, and it's not
Yeah.
paid. Is it
Yeah.
$100 or
Right.
$1 million? I don't know,
Right.
some order of magnitude estimate from maybe the clerks.
And who?
Oh, yeah, names.
Certainly, yes.
Not my
Yep.
name, please. Carolyn?
So if someone has outstanding fees, I don't own property, so I don't know the answer to this. When their tax comes in, is there a way to link to their other, like parking fees or other fees that they haven't paid so that they see them? Because people are going, you know, for the most part, are gonna pay that tax bill when it comes in. And so if there's other fees outstanding, that's one place where they're more likely to see them.
Yeah, I mean, so Invoice Cloud is our platform that you can pay online, right? You can pay for, you know, your water bill, your tax bill. It almost has different modules depending on which bill you're paying.
Right.
So I think a resident could maybe search to see if they have an outstanding bill. And actually maybe I guess if we started putting things through OpenGov, that might be an avenue where people could search, but it's not something we're doing currently.
I just paid my excise tax on my car, so I
Yep.
was like, oh, do I have any outstanding parking tickets?
No.
Do I have anything?
Yeah, and you
else?
could look through the other categories.
Right, you can look.
Yeah,
You can go looking for them.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, anything that is presently being digitized, those bills, as well as parking tickets are issued through sort of a digital handheld device. All of the other citations are being issued by registered letter or a hand-delivered like ticket book. So we would sort of have to modernize really every department that might be doing this work to get them on a digital platform that would get them into Invoice Cloud where you could actually see them. Yeah. So obviously something that could be done, but probably would be a good amount of labor associated with executing it.
So something maybe put on the agenda as a, potential project for the future.
Yeah, and to think of like maybe like the animal control officer or something. Maybe that's an area where it makes sense to equip them with a handheld, and maybe the health department, because they're going to do a lot of it, but maybe not every single department who's doing a handful of things per year.
Rebecca? Thank you. There's been a lot of interest in the committee in previous meetings on the field permit fees for the playing fields. Are you raising them, and how much? And will it be enough to cover the full maintenance of the playing fields?
So Christine, I'll defer to you. Are those currently codified in the bylaw?
Only 2 of them were listed, so we're adding the additional ones, and they are being evaluated currently by the Parks and Rec Commission as we're looking at making these changes.
So they will go in.
They will go in.
When?
Right now, there are only 2 fees listed in that article. So we're adding the additional fees, and they have been, some of them have been increased.
And they'll be available when the whole table comes out.
Correct.
Thank you.
And just to add on to that, I wouldn't expect that the increase would put us in a position to cover field maintenance in its entirety. I think that I don't know what the increase will be, but I suspect it'll be a modest increase because we need to make sure we're still in line with other surrounding or comparable communities so we can ensure that it's sort of unassailable. Like if we're wildly different than someone else, it's going to say, geez, Arlington is unreasonable in the fee they've set. I think we'd have a lot of ground to cover to sort of get us to a net zero situation with field maintenance.
Thank you. Sophie?
Going back to what Josh had pointed out regarding non-resident property owners, how does that work for leaf blowers or snow removal if the citation is given to the owner of record but they're not there? Do you have the address, the correct mailing address for that owner?
We would probably mail it to like where we send their tax bills.
Or they send the tax bill?
Yeah.
And then what about all the multifamily homes in town? Who's responsible for the sidewalk, for the, who do you cite when it's a multifamily home?
Oftentimes, we will try to identify if they have a management company or a sort of condo association. Otherwise, in instances of 2-family homes, I do believe they try to do the knock and talk and see who hired whomever, but if you can't determine it, to be honest, you issue a citation to both. And then people will come to you.
Any other questions on fees and trails?
It's a fee question, and it's probably a state fee. Fishing licenses, are they state or town?
That's not local.
Okay.
All right, we'll move on to revolving funds, Article 24, 25, and 26.
Okay. So Article 24 is for 17 Irving Street, which we also known as the Parmenter School. So this proposed article would add a new section to Title I, Article 22, related to the rental and leasing of the town-owned property at 17 Irving Street. So the intention here is to create a more appropriate accounting mechanism for certain payments that are outlined in our recently executed 15-year lease with the Arlington Children's Center. So we're seeking to collect payments from the tenant for shared expenses, such as the various utilities, the costs for which are apportioned proportional to the square footage occupied within the facility, because it's all centralized infrastructure and there is no sub-metering. And the way it works now is the town will pay the bill, and then we will divide up the costs based on the square footage that the tenant is responsible for. So the facilities department is paying it, we then bill the tenant, that payment comes in and it gets deposited in what's called an agency fund, and then it is transferred back into the facilities department budget. So it is sort of not necessarily the appropriate mechanism, whereas those funds for those utility payments should be coming in, deposited in the revolving fund, and then used to pay directly the next utility bill that comes in. And then the other item that we envision getting deposited into the revolving fund is the lease requires a capital contribution from the tenant for capital improvements to be made to the building. As of right now, and until this gets, if it gets adopted, that capital payment is not being segregated or set aside to offset the cost of capital improvements. It is simply going to the general fund, which sort of runs afoul of the contractual obligation that is there for those funds to pay for capital expenses. But the general lease payments for the rental of this building and other town buildings will continue to be general fund revenues. That is a source of funding in our local receipts. So this is really for those two very specific cases as required by lease. And we also have other instances where we, as a town, through the facilities department, may take on a repair of the Parmenter School building, but for which, once we have the invoice, we then want to back charge, again, based on square footage, the Arlington Children's Center, or now the Recreation Department. So we're trying to sort of identify avenues to help hold harmless the Facilities Department's general fund budget, because as you folks know, it is very difficult to keep up with the increase in their expenses. So that is one avenue we were considering for 17 Irving Street, but very similar for the establishment of a revolving fund for the community center under Article 25. So obviously there was a recent renovation of that building in the public areas, and we constructed a commercial kitchen. So certain spaces in that building are now very attractive for private rentals in a manner very similar to Town Hall. And it's actually more conducive than Town Hall for certain types of events that don't need sort of a grand hall, but want more of a spread out environment. So those rentals, once we sort of start marketing the building, will generate revenue that can defray costs associated with the upkeep and maintenance of that particular building. So we're hopeful to start collecting some additional monies that could offset or curtail some of the utility fees or some of the custodial contract cleaning expenses. So this is to establish a revolving fund. It will read and appear very similarly in the table as to the one that exists for Town Hall, for the Robbins Library Community Room, for the Robbins House, for the Fox Library Community Room, for short-term rentals where we will establish an hourly rate, and that hourly rate will be set to cover not just the cost of the custodial detail that gets assigned to that event, so that, again, to hold harmless the facilities department budget from that cost, but to generate some additional proceeds that we can then use to help do year-end transfers for utility payments throughout the course of the year or custodial contract payments. So that is the intention there of those two, to find ways to properly allocate funding or to generate additional revenue for the facilities department to maintain our buildings.
So there already is a revolving fund for 17 Irving Street, or there's not?
There is not.
There's
It's
not.
called an agency fund. It's just
So this is to create two new revolving
Yeah.
funds.
one, and they'll be defined for each building.
And Article 26 recycling revolving fund.
This was a little bit by just being opportunistic as we looked at the other two revolving funds and I read the language for the existing recycling fee revolving fund, and I saw that it was authorized for fees associated with the pickup of so-called white goods, computers, and televisions. Obviously, since this was drafted, we've been through 3 waste haulers. We no longer engage in the business of disposing of appliances, right? It used to be a sticker-based program. You'd go to Public Works, you'd get a sticker, you'd bring it to your house, you'd slap it there, and then someone would come. So what I'm proposing and what was in the select board's report to town meeting is to change this to fees for the collection of electronics, mattresses, and metal items, and cart and overflow bag fees. So to reconcile our recycling revolving fund to our current trash contract, where we've, implemented an orange bag overflow program where you purchase the bags, at Walgreens, for example, you pay a certain amount per bag. We then get those funds, we deposit them, but then they have to go back out to waste management for the collection of the bag and then for the contents of that bag, right? Like it's adding tonnage to the waste hauler. So reconciled the existing language to match the things that we're currently taking back at the reuse and recycle center on Ryder Street, but also to introduce the proper accounting mechanism for the orange bag fees as implemented under our new contract. And the language does have cart fees. We don't currently have any cart fees. I think we've started to experience some people with not necessarily buyer's remorse, but who may have requested small carts and now want to upsize to larger carts. And where it's not part of our initial deployment that was already funded, though we haven't instituted anything, we thought, well, if this became something that we had to do regularly and or we had to restock and buy new carts for those individuals, we would want to be able to charge a fee for that. So then it would go into the revolving fund and then we would restock our cart supply if necessary. So that's sort of future-proofing, though it's something we haven't experienced to the extent yet where we haven't been able to just absorb it within our existing stock or just turn it over to the repair contractor and say, hey, can you go swap these out or deliver these? So that's a little bit of future-proofing in that context.
Right, Charlie, Sophie, Carolyn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with respect to Articles 24 and 25, I think I understand the mechanism that you proposed. About 25 years ago, the funds from the rental buildings went into some sort of a specific fund for those buildings. And then the state law changed, and the funds had to go into the revenue had to go into the general fund. So over the years, the maintenance of those buildings or replacement, or major parts of replacement programs were carried in the capital budget. So now you are taking the capital charge that you're giving to the renter or lessee,
Yep.
And putting that into a revolving fund. So let's say that the furnace has to be replaced, and the half the price of the furnace is now in that revolving fund because the person is doing it, and it has to be replaced next year, for sure. So suddenly, where's the other half come from? In other words, it's not in the capital budget. How do you get the money? Are you putting those funds into the revolving fund also as a reserve, or what? How are you matching the share? For example, in Parmenta, you've got the recreation department part and maybe some private company in another part. So you have to match it. How do you do that?
So, I'm not sure that we would necessarily have to match it. It's also the case, right? These aren't necessarily significant sums of money that we would expect to cover the full capital outlay, but it could be used annually to cover the debt service, so it's not borne by the capital plan. If that makes sense.
No,
Because
because theoretically, the town could be using 2/3 of the building and the private tenant 1/3, right?
Yep.
So,
but we're not charging, like, the lease spells out, like, you're gonna pay, your capital contribution is this much per square foot annually, paid monthly. It's not necessarily tied to a specific capital project. So like that is the only sum.
but it's
How do
going
we
to a
get in?
specific fund, right?
Yes.
So when you come up against the capital expenditure,
Mhm.
if I were the private lessee, I would expect that the town would be taking 2/3 of the cost, or somehow that would have to be an equitable solution, and I'm just wondering how you're planning for that.
And are you thinking, Charlie, it's something that's emergent, and so we can't plan within the capital plan for that? Because right now, we're covering the debt service for some of our town-owned rental proproperties in the capital
I know
plan,
how it
right?
works.
Yeah.
But this is a change, and
Yeah,
if the money was previously going into the general fund, flowing into the capital budget,
yeah,
now somehow or another, we're segregating this money, but we're not segregating all of it. We're not, I'm just trying to understand why are we segregating, is the question.
It's so that you have a segregated account specifically available for the capital planning committee or capital budget to use, instead of, some sort of other sum of money coming from the general fund. It's like, here's what's available to the capital planning committee for 17 Parmenter from the lease to the private occupant. Like, here's the, X amount that has been collected. Spend all of it, spend some of it, spend it on debt service, spend it on some portion of a capital project. But we don't, there's no way to generate additional funds for capital improvements from the private tenant, right? It's outlined as a very specific flat dollar amount that they have to pay monthly, and then it's at the town's discretion.
What's the advantage of doing that versus having it go into the general fund and planning for the expenditure on the building as the leaseholder?
I think it's the number one advantage isn't necessarily procedural per se. It's more of, it's the appropriate way to account for those revenues. Say, take the past 2 years, and that tenant has paid $30,000 or $40,000 annually in capital contributions. However, none of those contributions they've made for capital improvements at that building have been spent on capital improvements to that building. I think it's the making sure that we're setting aside those revenues and can demonstrate, here's what they were for, and then here's what we spent them on with respect to capital improvements at that facility.
I'm still, it's a mystery to me what happens to the town portion of the building. I mean, there's a disconnect there. I think, either the town should be putting a reserve aside for the capital expenditure for that building, or all of it should go into the general fund and should be considered as part of the general capital plan. That's what I'm wrestling with.
Yeah, I'm wrestling with, you're saying, the town portion. The town portion is always going to be the capital plan.
If you have 2/3 of the building,
Mhm.
and the recreation department is an enterprise fund.
Yep.
Right? So they should be paying for 2/3 of the capital. But of course, we know that doesn't happen. It's gonna come from the town.
Right.
So, I could see a situation where something has to be spent on that building. The capital budget is already fully allocated because you haven't been planning for that building. It just strikes me as a.
It's a good point. That building has a lot of capital needs, right? As a community, we haven't invested in it because we haven't occupied it, frankly. So there's roof work, chimney work, heating system work that needs to come up. I'm looking for ways to ensure that, to the extent we can, we're holding the general fund harmless by capturing capital contributions from the private tenant, and then also have the opportunity to allocate debt service onto the recreation department as the primary occupant of the building, or having them spend any retained earnings they may have for the emergency situations, because it is now their home, right? Like if they have funds, they can be responsible for the emergency repairs, but we don't have a lease with them as the tenant that requires a set specific capital contribution monthly, as we've done for the rink or some of their other facilities would say, like, here's the cost, here's the debt service, you now need to budget for it annually. But in this instance, they could conceivably be made to pay directly for some emergent cost for which, the town's general fund is not budgeted for.
Thank you.
Sophie?
I think Charlie's point is interesting, and I'm curious on the legal versus just being transparent to the lessees. It's an interesting point, but my specific question was gonna go to Article 26, the recycling revolving fund. A couple of questions. I think in the past it had been mentioned a couple of years ago that a lot of times residents just pay in cash when they go for recycling. And is there really an accounting mechanism? How is that? How can residents be confident that it's accounted money in and going towards this revolving fund? Or what's the record keeping on cash, since it's usually just for recycling items?
So Charlotte is our recycling coordinator, and she does have a strong process with some of her volunteers in terms of collecting the cash. She then brings it over to the treasurer's office, as other departments do. So your question about how would they know if?
Well, I guess in the past I had, someone had asked me, a constituent had asked me about how do we know we can trust the volunteers that they are pocketing a few $10 bills or what is the what is the town's money?
So cash is always a place that you're paying attention to in terms of your controls, right? And so we've actually been working to reduce the amount of cash that departments are utilizing. The recycling is one area in which they can do that we've been talking about trying to use less cash. There's that area is a little bit challenging because we don't yet have something like at the res, for example. They went through setting up, they have their own MiFi system, so they can actually use a credit card at the res. We went through, a long process to move toward that. So that would probably be something we could do for recycling to continue to reduce cash. We are learning from the experience at the res, and I think it's actually been a really good experience. So it might be something we can continue to roll out to other places.
Right. I think especially if we're keeping track for a revolving fund.
Yes.
Make sure we put money in there. And
Interesting
then
point. I'm not sure that there's ever been any identified issues, because we probably know, like, hey, we have this full container of TVs that we need to dispose of, but we can't afford to do it. Yeah.
If those comments that come in.
Yeah.
I don't know. And the other was just a comment when we had the Zero Waste Committee come and present for their budget. They reported that they had not been involved or consulted at all with the trash bins and the sizes and which way the town should go.
Mm-hmm.
So just sort of some feedback that I think there's some surprise there that we went through this whole question last year of, do we go with the big totes, the smaller totes? You go for the state reimbursement by going for the small ones, but there was no discussion between the town and the Zero Waste.
But I would challenge that and say there was a public meeting where it was discussed and they provided plenty of public input. The vote wasn't their favor.
Anything else? Sophie?
No, that's it, thanks.
Carolyn, and then Rebecca, and then Anne.
Okay, so first one is do within the revolving funds or the capital long-range plan, do we already have set aside funds or plans for buildings like the compartment, or do we not?
Yeah, we would certainly incorporate Parmenter into the capital plan. And we have in the past.
Okay.
And we also, you'll see in the capital plan, you do see there's debt service already being charged to some of these buildings, but as Jim said, it's not the equivalent amount to what we actually charge them in their leases.
The next question is, in the years where we take money from the revolving fund and use it on a capital plan, do we then put that money, that equivalent money into the general fund? Because what we've just done is increase the capital fund for that year.
So
It may
when,
not be much, but at some point it may be a fair amount.
okay, so what we do is we look at the debt service for, so like some of our other rental properties. And we attribute that to, so we then basically charge the general fund. Yes, we go above that 5% by the debt service for some of those properties because we've brought in that rent into the general fund to begin with.
In the past,
Yes.
right? But now you're not going to do that.
Yep.
So basically, in essence, in some sense, what you're doing is, you're collecting X dollars per year for capital plan.
Yep.
Now, you've just used an additional revolving fund to help cover the cost of something, which means you, to some degree, well, okay, you could say, but we would have taken it out of the general fund anyway. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so that
Yeah.
you
So
don't,
it doesn't make a difference.
so we don't take it from the general. fund.
Right, you're not taking it from, okay, all right. And then the last one is, not so much on rental fees, but on those leased costs. With this, is it going to drastically increase some of these nonprofits' leases the year that you've implemented? Or you're already doing?
This one lease started in 24, I believe, with Arlington Children's Center.
And what I would say is, if it's going to create a drastic increase, would you consider doing it over a couple of years rather than suddenly increasing their amount drastically?
Yeah, so
And this may not be a factor, but
yeah, good point, not a factor, right? There's just one tenant, their lease was in effect for 24 and they agreed to, it's like 3 5-year terms, so for a 15-year lease. But it's something that I believe at each 5-year interval could be renegotiated. And that would be the case if we took on some major renovations at the Parmenter School, we could say like, geez, we actually need to increase the capital contribution being provided under lease, and we'd be able to point to, here we got these 3 projects coming up, or we've done these ones, or this one's coming up, here's what we project the debt service to be, and we want to make sure that you're, adequately providing for that. So I think at the 5-year intervals, we would have the opportunity to revisit that particular element based on what we may be doing at that property.
Rebecca?
Thank you. I think I got the answer to this, but just a logistical question on the Parmenter funds then. Do I understand correctly, you wouldn't take money from the rec department enterprise fund, it wouldn't need to funnel through this just because the rec uses so much the building, right? So if you got an electric bill, you bill rec and you bill this.
Yeah, they pay their portion directly because the funds live in town coffers.
It doesn't need to transfer.
Yep.
Okay. And then I just wanted to add one thing about Charlie's point about that the town uses a portion of the Parmenter. That is one of the justifications that the rec department has given us for why they maintain such a large balance of retained earnings, is that she is under the impression that they would be on the hook for their share of capital, repair costs and things like that. She's under the impression that
That's the
they would
deal.
have to pay, and so that's one of the reasons they don't just use their retained earnings for playgrounds and fields, and that they have to keep that now that she says they're responsible for that shared responsibility. Thank you.
Annie?
So picky point, but I'm back on the toters. I'm sorry, but I thought we got smaller toters in order to get the state money. No.
And we would have had to deploy in entirety the 35-gallon toters to get the state money. We did get a grant, but not the lesser Mass DEP grant that would have provided for 35-gallon toters.
Alan Jones?
Thank you. I think you're sort of asking Carolyn's question a different way. With the long-range plan, the capital plan and the long-range plan is really simple, it's 5%. With some adjustments for things like the ambulance fund.
Yeah.
If shifting the charge to the tenants for future capital goes from going as a local receipt versus going into a revolving fund, does that change the relationship to the 5%? Does that become another adjustment to the 5%, or is it included in the 5%?
It would be an other funding source. So you know how we've got other funding sources and we have adjustments?
Yeah. So
So,
it's sort of effectively bumping up the 5% a little bit, right?
yeah,
Or the
it's
total
probably
dollars.
It's
essentially
moving
the
it from one
same.
bucket to another. You know, the adjustments remain the same.
But
Yeah.
the 5% calculation doesn't include the adjustments.
It's above, correct.
It's above the adjustment, so by shifting it from the general fund to an adjustment, it sort of effectively increases the total amount of money that the capital plan would have.
It's not if it's removing the money from the general fund, and then you're taking 5% of a lesser number.
I guess if
I'm not
it's,
sure how that works out, okay.
I guess if you were bringing more into the general fund than you were spending in the capital plan,
Yeah.
then yes, it would. But if we're, you know, in the lease, we say, you know, this is $30,000 toward capital improvements. So it would ideally, you'd be both charging that 30,000 and then at some point using that 30 toward debt service for projects in the
So
building.
maybe if you shift $1, it takes a nickel out of the 5% and adds $1 to it, so it's like you're adding 95 cents to it. You know, it shifts it a little bit.
Mhm.
Sure.
Putting more money in the capital fund, I don't have a problem with that, but it's just something to
Right.
recommend.
Charlie?
So, I'm feeling like I'm trying to beat a dead horse here, but, this is, the money that would be coming in from rent for this building, I mean, yes, you appropriately charge the renter for, you know, somewhere in that rental fee is money to cover capital expense. But by segregating it, and not putting it in the general fund, you're reducing the ability of the town to spend that general fund money on some other item if it's necessary in a particular year. In other words, if you're gonna bond that furnace 3 years from now, that's fine. But in the meantime, maybe that $20,000 or $50,000 a year is needed for the schools or needed for the police department, and it's not available. So I'm having a hard time getting my arms around why we're doing that.
I think the point that's missing is there's like a legal contract that says we're like, I am Arlington Children's Center, I am giving you X amount per square foot, paid monthly, annually, for capital projects at 17 Irving Street. And we're saying, thank you very much for giving us that. We're gonna go spend it on a school. Appreciate it. When really we should be segregating those funds, and whether we spend them in that year or not and carry them over to the next fiscal year and saying,
In that logic, you should be taking the equivalent amount, whether it's 50% or 2/3 that the rec has, and that should be going into a reserve fund to match that. That's what I was trying to say, because you're not meeting your legal obligation to that renter.
So, Sophie, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I wanted to, I don't necessarily agree that the town would have a legal obligation to match the funds. However, what I find odd here is if the contract doesn't say that the town has to spend it while they're a tenant, and that you get to keep it and there's no reimbursement, then I'm not sure it makes a difference whether you segregate it or not. I mean, yes, it's a nice paper trail in case they come and say, we've paid you X for capital and you haven't spent any. But if there's not a legal obligation on the town to actually spend the money given for capital, and if you don't spend it, give it back, then it's a bunch of just shifting. I don't see the point. But.
yeah, and I think the accounting is helpful with respect to the capital planning committee to say, okay, if something's going into the capital budget for this building, here's what's available to support that. And no more, no less, right? Like here's what was provided. The rest will have to be funded by the recreation department. We don't plan on, using general funds
It's just
here
how the sausage was made, sort of in our
within the
system, but
context.
legally, there's no obligation to give back the money, so it wouldn't matter if we tracked the money.
I would have to check to see if we
Okay.
have to give
I
it
think
back.
that's, would be my concern, is making sure we want to give it back.
Mhm.
Carolyn?
So I'm going to continue beating a dead horse.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I'm gonna respond to Sophie, as a renter in a 75-unit building, you know, I pay a certain amount of my rent is for work on the building. There's no guarantee it's gonna happen in my apartment or that I'll benefit from it. So from the argument you're giving, I'm like, too bad, that's the way it works if you're renting.
Right.
And so I don't really have that much of a problem with that, but I understand, is there a legal issue? So I'm gonna take a little different approach. Rebecca just said, well, Rick has told us we have to keep money so that we have it in case there's an emergency for capital fund. Well, that's an argument for saying then they have to have it earmarked specifically for that, so that we can't use it elsewhere in town. Because they're sitting on a huge pile of money right now. And what we would like to see, I think based on the conversation we have, whether it happens this year or next year, is what's that money for? Yes, I understand they need to leave a certain amount for specific, salaries or projects or revolving fee coming in and payment of salaries going out. And yes, I understand that there might be a portion they need for building management, but I want to see that, just like in your own bank account. You might have a savings account for, your 3-month savings or whatever extra savings, emergency fund. You might have an account for when you're going to buy a new car or when you're going to redo your kitchen. They don't have that right now. They just have this huge pot of money sitting there. It's like, well, wait a second. What are you doing with that money? So I would prefer to see that. And and this is the case where I agree with Charlie on some level, that, if we're saying they get to keep that big chunk of money, well then label it that it's for this situation. Does that make sense? I mean, you don't have to do that, but, that's my suggestion.
Josh?
Yeah, we're probably spending too much time, but just to clarify the questions I've heard, Alan is saying, I think, that if for some humongous reason we raise so much money from 17 Irving Street that it actually is another 5% of our total budget. Now, is that sort of outside of the capital planning 5%? So now we're actually spending 10% of our overall budget for capital? Or do you actually deduct that whatever out of the 5% that we're allocating to capital and say, okay, well, it's only 4.5% because we're putting in some percentage from this? I think that's your question.
Yeah, it would never be.
It wouldn't be that
It would
much,
never be
but
that.
maybe the idea is that we're kind of creeping up on more than our 5%.
I mean, yes, all of the other funding sources and the override promises, those are all above and beyond the 5%. So like this fund chart that I showed you all when I was here before, yep, this whole about $1 million is over the 5%.
Well, those are like
Actually,
debt
the million is
exclusions,
just-
or I don't know what they are. but-
No,
No.
override promises,
Okay.
some of our, some of the money from the rec enterprise fund, so,
Okay.
yeah, they are other funding sources
Ambulance
or,
fund, antenna fund.
yeah.
Okay, so
For
this is not
example.
different.
Community center rent.
Yeah.
Is being used as a $40,000 funding source, right? So that money is just going to the general fund and then being earmarked for spending above and beyond the 5% in the plan.
And then Charlie's point, if ACC puts in 50,000, in theory, the rec department should be putting in 75,000 or whatever, because they're a little bit more. And then the furnace costs 70,000. Is the understanding that only a third of that is coming from the ACC portion of the revolving fund, and whereas the other portion of the revolving fund to pay for that?
See, I think you use the example of, say, they put in $40,000 for the year and the boiler replacement was gonna be $125,000. We have no recourse to get any additional funds from the ACC. We're like, that's all you have. I would turn to the rec department and be like, you've got the rest, right? It's not gonna be percentage based because we're not allocating the costs on a project, right? We're just collecting a set fee per year if we need to use it on an emergency grade or if it's being programmed in the capital plan just to fund debt service, like, oh, you did the roof. We're doing a roof project this summer, 125 grand a year. I don't know if that was borrowed or cash, but you could say like, geez, as part of the capital plan, we'll just want to contribute all of the ACC contribution to the debt service for that project. They're like, I don't envision this being like another mechanism for us to equally allocate shares between the tenants. Like it's just a set dollar value per square foot that we're gonna get each year, and it's to go to capital projects. It could be something that occurs during the year, could be debt service, you could accrue it for a few years and pay for some capital project in its entirety. And it, as long as it's on the building, it doesn't even have to be within their suite. So like, respect where everyone's coming from, but at the same time, like, it's there for capital contribution, and there's no way to then like go ahead and divvy it up. If there was, if the rec department had some significant repair to cover and there was nothing in this account to offset it, they would have to pay the whole thing, right? We wouldn't be like, oh, you only have to pay, 67%. The only way that we do that, like very specifically to the dollar every month, is for utilities, like the natural gas, the electricity, the oil. If we get a very known cost, just apply a formula and say, you're gonna pay this amount, you're gonna pay this amount. Wouldn't necessarily be the same for capital, because the fee is fixed.
Okay, last question on revolving funds.
Okay, Madam Chair, this horse needs to be buried.
Yeah.
We're moving on now. All right, so let's get to our typical finance committee articles that we report on, but before you do that, I don't think you put this on the list, but Article 33, acceptance of legislation.
You didn't put it on the list.
I didn't. What is it?
That the 61.
62A. 62A.
Oh.
The town will vote to adopt local option allowing tax collectors to enter into payment agreements for properties.
Yep.
Do you know anything about that?
Yes.
To start, although we do already allow for payment plans for folks, this local option would sort of place very specific parameters around how it's done.
So this was part of some of the changes that the state was allowing to make payment plans a little bit longer, a little bit more flexible. You could forgive interest. There were a number of changes that that towns could adopt. I think what this bylaw change, okay, so what this change would do is allow you to make some of these changes. It's not necessarily dictating that what you put in place, but it's allowing you to be a little bit more forgiving with people who aren't paying their taxes. In talking with Lynn Gallagher, our treasurer, this wouldn't be a different on a case-by-case basis. If we decided, okay, we're gonna allow 10 years instead of 5 years, that would be the case for everyone. It wouldn't be just, it wouldn't differ from resident to resident. Right now, she does have a few people that do have payment plans, and I know she actually was just telling me about someone who'd come in recently whose grandmother has a number of years of unpaid taxes and wanted to talk about a payment plan. I mean, it's something that we're already doing, and something that she of course is willing to think about making some adjustments and changes. But right now, I think that she's finding that that it's working as we're doing it right now. We do have a number of people though that are not paying their taxes, and a couple of people are in tax title. So far, she and I are just started talking about, what she would see would be the implication of something like this.
All right.
The things that mostly changes are the duration of the agreement. Does it go from like 5 years to 10 years?
Yeah.
And the upfront payment that is required to start the repayment plan. I would say I think the most concerning or perhaps consequential or impactful thing that 62A allows for is municipalities under that can waive interest. And I think that's something that would require a lot more thought. It's one thing to adjust how much gets paid up front or for how long, but the waiving of interest on unpaid taxes can be a significant sum, obviously would be helpful for the taxpayer, but at the same time is, revenue that has always been due and collected by the municipality.
PEG access.
Sorry, no, I'm done.
Is there a set interest rate? Does the interest rate change based on what's going on in basic interest rates?
It's prescribed by general law.
Okay, so it's already set.
Yeah.
Okay, PEG access, Julie, you're gonna get some numbers.
Yep, I will get you those numbers, yep.
Anything different this year for PEG access?
Anything different?
It's down slightly from last year. I think their revenues are maybe, they were projecting about 3% less, maybe 3.5% less. But it's obviously a simplified budget. It looks largely similar to last year with a slight operating revenue decrease.
Endorsement of parking benefit district expenditures 60. We talked about this briefly. We have the numbers. Does anyone, we haven't voted on it yet, I don't think, Carolyn, right?
So, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So we have a question out to legal about whether or not we can put more of the salaried staff related to parking and traffic into the parking fund, and we haven't gotten an answer yet. And I know he's busy with lots of stuff.
Yeah.
But I kind of want that resolved on some level.
Is there a particular staff number,
Well,
just
so
to contemplate?
Oh, now I have to do it off the top of my head. So the parking administrator right now is like 67%, and the question is, can we do?
Should be 75, it should be 75% of Suzanne Tinlin in the treasurer's office, and then the 3 parking control officers are all 75%.
Right, so the question is, can it be
100%?
100% on any of them? And then.
No. Just because they work outside the parking benefit district.
Are they
Right.
really working 25% outside the benefit?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
so we had, up until last year, from the date of inception, it had always been 50%. So the change this year is to propose it
Yeah.
to 75%, to say, oh geez, we think we were spending that much time there, but if like the PCOs patrol East Arlington,
Right.
the Heights, and if you think of any overnight parking ticket that gets processed as issued by APD, those are flowing through Suzanne as our parking permits that aren't being handled within the PBD. So we'd be, trust me, I wanted to offset 100%, like 75% was like the max based on, the traffic lieutenant telling us how much time the PCOs were spending in the PBD.
It was 117,000 last year, now it's up to 190.
Okay, that's a nice change.
Yeah.
The movement.
Well, you just spent 5 minutes talking about it. Can we change to the manager's budget?
I like it, Al.
Charlie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, this is another case of sequestration of funds. And the general fund and the general needs of the town can't be met by the money that's collected into this district. And there are some things, I don't have the list in front of me, but I remember there are some things, first of all, the district didn't spend a lot of money last year, so there's a balance left over, something like $300,000 or $400,000. And there are some items in there that I would think, if this were my business, and we were facing a cash crunch like the override and this thing we're going through right now, I wouldn't spend the money to do some of those things. And on the other hand, if you didn't spend the money, you can't spend it anywhere else because this is sequestered. So I just note that, and it's not a little bit of money. I mean, we're talking close to, if you take 2 years in a row, you're talking close to $1 million.
Yeah.
And I have to say, going back to the article that we're not talking about it anymore with the horse, we're doing the same thing there, okay? And it's just, in my humble opinion, it's just the wrong thing to do because it restricts the town's flexibility to meet its financial demands in any given year. So.
Obviously, we're looking at the budget, not a warrant article to establish it. That was obviously, a decade ago, but Charlie, if it makes you feel any better, I looked at that balance and then looked at some of the bills for removing snow from Mass Ave in our commercial corridors, and I had an idea. Given that we've overexpended our snow and ice budget, I thought, geez, the parking benefit district, the snow removal along Mass Ave and clearing around the meters is a cost that is attributable to them, so they can, we can tap into some of that balance, hopefully this year, to help offset some of those costs that would otherwise have to be borne by the general fund.
So, Sophie?
Thank you. So along those lines, so I'm happy to hear that. Is the Veterans Memorial Project part of the parking district? And are any funds being used from the parking district because of that?
Yes, it's within the district, and yes, there are some funds. There will be funds to pay for benches. Some of the aspects of the park will be paid for through that fund.
Okay, because I was curious because the Disability Commission is planning on putting money towards that project as well for companion seating, because supposedly there's not enough money in other places, so I'm kind of, capital, there seems like there's fun with money in it, why is the Disability Commission getting asked to put money in?
You saw the CPA conversation, we didn't meet, the park didn't meet the amount that it needed to move forward as it had hoped. So I think they're just looking for funds in any way in order to continue the project for July 1.
Okay, but there's a lot of money in the parking district and that's in the parking district.
Yes. And there will be funds.
It would be permissible for certain things. You pay for the big belly trash cans, the benches, like site furnishings, maybe some of the area lighting. We would not be able to spend it on like the monuments themselves or, so there's sort of a fine line of some of the things that we could pick off as line items in the budget. And I know, I talked to the director today about potentially pursuing some congressionally directed spending to finally get that project over the hump. It's been many years in the coming and we're trying to sort of go everywhere we can.
Carolyn? One of the other things, since you're here, one of the other things that came up with the parking fund was, should the parking enforcement and admin be listed as an offset? And I don't know if it does, if it's just language, but. Is there any more money?
I'm looking at what you're talking about.
And one of the things that Lynn had mentioned was that there are other roles within the police department. And so maybe if there's a percentage of other people within the police department, could that also be put into this line item? Which I don't have a number of what the line item is.
Are you talking about the parking department offset?
Yes, the parking benefits fund, one of the line items is for the 75% of those salaries.
Mhm.
And so the question is, should that line item be an offset?
Right.
It is.
Or is it just semantics?
Is that the one in the treasurer's office?
Well, I'm
Or is
looking
that
at
in
police
police?
services parking fund offset,
Okay, yes.
79,000
Thanks,
for
thank you.
this year.
Thank you.
So it is.
And I think there's one in the
Yeah, and
parking
there is a
budget
chart,
too.
yeah, there is.
Okay, thanks. I hadn't bothered to look at it. Thank you.
To that point, I could contemplate in the future, now that we've assigned an officer in charge of the traffic unit, or traffic parking and details and built it out, that perhaps there's an opportunity in the future to capture that supervisory element over the parking control officers.
So like 25%, 20%, 50%, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're, and perhaps Charlie wouldn't want to hear this, but we're going to pursue potentially instituting parking benefit districts in other areas of town, so we can actually start generating meter revenue in other areas of town at some point in the future. And, perhaps then it would be even additional funds available to offset existing general fund expenditures if justifiable. The meters have been in the center for quite some time now, but we still have not, there hasn't been any progress made in inducing parking turnover in the Heights or East Arlington.
He knows I live in the Heights, so he just wants to get more revenue from parking tickets.
And 50 cents an hour just doesn't seem,
Do you need me to show you how to use the free 15 minutes? I'm happy to help.
Be careful because people will start in with, you're trying to turn us into Somerville and Cambridge.
All right, Alan Jones, and then we'll.
Thank you. I think the question Carolyn was asking, in the parking benefit district budget, there's $190,311 that's sort of lumped together.
Yeah.
They're thinking just for clarity,
We
maybe
could
pull
break
out
it
two
out.
line
Yeah.
items for the parking offset and the parking offset, and the police offset. Because it's not, if you have an offset of 123 here, it's nice to have 123 expense
you're right.
some over here or something. So just matter of clarity, just
Alignment.
We can handle that.
Article 63 amendments to FY 26. We may have some, right?
We are honing in on whether we will have some, yes. We are working really, very, very closely, fire, legal, health insurance.
Health insurance is probably
Yeah,
the one that is most likely to need adjustment for the current fiscal year.
yeah, yep,
Yeah, you're gonna have numbers on collective bargaining for us, right?
yep. I have my spreadsheet right here, but I can give it, I can send it along. Back to what you were saying about amending the fiscal 26. I know typically people come in June, right, to speak with you about what they need for the reserve fund. So, we have been watching our departments that are trending poorly, but it is, they're having to do some estimation about what the next 3 months looks like. And they're all working very hard to give us as accurate a picture as possible. We're really trying to get it as tight as we can. So that's why we're sort of like balancing, figuring out, are we actually going to need that amendment to the 26 budget or not? So we will get you that information as soon as we possibly can.
Any questions on Article 63 or 62 collective bargaining, Charlotte?
What does it mean to have an amendment to the 26 budget?
What it means is we are currently, we settled a number of contracts. So the amount of money that we're going to need for collective bargaining, looking at retros and then looking at fiscal 27 is going beyond what we have in the salary reserve. So we need extra funds to pay out some of those retros. The health insurance budget is gone over. A number of our budgets have gone over to the point of not being sure that we're going to be able to capture it in the reserve fund.
Am I misinterpreting things? But these warrant articles can't be approved by the Department of Revenue until 60 days after July 1st, right? So how can that impact what's going on in fiscal 26?
Well, being able to actually amend, being able to amend the current budget and being able to use a funding source to be able to actually fund that amendment. We would have to probably wait until, I don't know, I would have to look into it.
Because the budget's not real until it gets approved by I think it's the Department of Revenue, I'm not sure, but somebody has.
They don't approve our budget. It's real 14 days after the town clerk certifies the town meeting is in. The Attorney General certifies the bylaw changes. But the budgets, no, they don't. That's not their.
Okay, so it's 14 days after the end of the year, but how is that gonna change what money we have?
That's 14 days after the town clerk certifies that the town meeting has complete, the budget is accepted.
Okay.
So
After the vote,
in this fiscal year.
it would be after the vote on that article. correct?
Well, I think the town meeting would have to be dissolved.
Okay, because someone could reconsider it, perhaps?
So, okay, so that it can happen, that can take effect in this fiscal year, but
Yeah.
aren't the funds raised, set by the tax rate, by what, that's all been predetermined up to this point. Where are we gonna get the funds?
The town meeting could change the budget and reduce the public works by $100,000, and now that money is available. Couldn't we just transfer the money?
Two different fiscal years.
FY 26, right, so that's, we're like 90% done.
We're going on
You-
27 budget.
Yeah.
You could transfer if it was available in other areas of the budget. Otherwise, you need to go to an available funding source, right? Like balance and override stabilization fund, you could take it from free cash, like you could seek a funding source that wouldn't necessarily impact the tax rate, right? You don't have to raise it, it's already been raised. Or you could, if you had it somewhere else in the budget, move it over.
So the money from amendments to the 26 budget would go to pay 26 expenses from the collective bargaining.
Yes,
27
Or
would have,
potentially the health insurance budget because it was
Right.
under budgeted.
we are budgeting for 27, budgeting the needs for collective bargaining for 27.
Yeah, the
We've already
health
included
insurance
that.
and collective bargaining for 27 will be budgeted for appropriately and forward-looking and raised when the tax rate would be set in December.
So basically you'd be taking more money out of the override stabilization fund in fiscal 26 than was appropriated last year? Is that what?
If we needed to go to an alternative available funding source, if it wasn't simply, okay, this budget is over, we need, like, say, Public Works, right, if they were gonna turn back $1 million and it would become free cash. Instead, as Al said, you reduce their budget and take that money and essentially transfer or increase the budget that, needs it just within 26.
Thank you.
So it's one of those two avenues.
Paul, and then we're gonna go on to the feasibility studies.
But free cash is also a possible funding source for this.
Correct.
And
Paul, can you project your voice more?
so free cash is also a funding source possibly. And how does snow currently stand with all this?
Snow and ice is presently about $750,000 over budget.
Is that it, Paul?
Thank you.
All right, let's talk about the feasibility studies, Article 66 and 67. What's the total cost and where are we getting it? And what are we doing with it?
Okay, so Audison is currently for a feasibility study. The 27 amount is, oh no, that's the 2.5 million, sorry, I've got the two studies in my mind. So yes, Audison is 2.5 million, we are currently planning to ban for that. So the impact would be $90,000 debt service starting to be paid in fiscal 28, and another, I think it's about $100,000 for that ban, a second year of a ban that we would start paying the debt service in 29 for. The other for Hardy is, the feasibility study is in 27. I believe we've got 385 in the budget. We would be borrowing for that as well. MSBA would cover 44% of the feasibility study for Hardy. So bringing down, our local share of that, though we are appropriating the full amount, which MSBA requires.
Questions, Alan?
so are we gonna be appropriating like the 2.5 million and the other in these warrant articles or in the capital budget warrant article?
So at present, right, because those funds live within because we're doing them within the confines of the capital plan, they live in the capital budget article as well. MSBA, being who they are, prefer to see distinct warrant articles. So, you know, those were also submitted and passed through their legal counsel. So ideally, I think that within each of those articles, it presents the opportunity for a vote on each of those projects, and that would be the amounts to be appropriated. But if for some reason town meeting didn't fund, say, the Hardy project, for example, there would need to be, right, like that corresponding amount that's been budgeted for the debt service that Julie outlined in the capital budget. There would have to be a way to go back and essentially, in that vote language, have it spelled out completely so that if that project didn't move forward, you know the sum of money that's not to be considered as part of the capital plan.
It'd be easier just to take it out of the capital budget and put it in the articles and.
Yeah, we were actually just talking, and Chris Moore and I were also talking about that. That we probably could just pull it out and just put it within each of the individual articles.
I think it would be cleaner.
Yeah.
Carolyn?
No, well, I'm gonna beat a dead horse. When they do the feasibility study, can they look at Crosby Park and Leslie Ellis School? It's the same plot size as Gibbs. I know we sold Leslie Ellis, and I understand Crosby is supposed to be open space, but this land that the Audison is on is really risky. Decade after decade after decade, just disaster situation.
So you're talking about Audison, the alternative
Yeah,
site
as
being
an
Leslie
alternative
Ellis.
site.
You know, part of their process does look at parcels that may be purchased for school use, right? So you have to look at a sort of a baseline option of just like code upgrade and base repair, right? You have to evaluate reconstruction options. And if you're gonna evaluate new construction options, you don't just look at that site. I think you have to choose perhaps a minimum of 3 other sites. They make you look at regionalization of your school district. Like there's a whole menu of alternatives that need to be considered and costed out as part of the feasibility study process. So I hadn't contemplated a parcel that we don't own, but they do make you look at anything that's underutilized, like existing parcels that may be underutilized. But also I think they do look at other parcels that may be available for purchase for use.
I mean, obviously we sold that
Yeah.
that land. That's why we did that. I do not know, but
Yeah.
but the nice thing about it is it's on the bus. Whereas if you were to
Right.
use, say, the field over St. Camillus, you'd have to bus most of the kids.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So you need to be considering that cost as well. Consider properties.
Yeah, in this particular feasibility study, if approved, would look at the Audison as it exists currently, which is a 7 through 8 model. And it also has to look at returning it to a 6 through 8 model. Right, so that potentially removing a school building from the portfolio, or does that provide an opportunity to consider that site? You know, I don't know.
Could you flip it? Could you turn Gibbs into a 6 through 8 building?
In its current footprint, I don't think it would support that, but I think
And you
that
don't think there's enough land?
there very well could be. You know, again, these are the options the feasibility study has to explore, but the statement of interest in what the MSBA was interested in seeing is like, not just the current model, we want to know what the biggest possible project could be, which is back to a traditional 6 through 8 middle school, so getting down to 1 middle school building instead of 2.
So if you are going to move the dollar allocations into 66 and 67, will we know when you want to do that? Because we reopened the capital budget, we need to know what we're voting on there.
Sure. We'll make those changes this week.
Okay.
They were in the, sorry to belabor this, but they were in the capital budget initially because those sums, if approved, we wanted to make sure fit within the 5% capital allocation. So we weren't looking to spend above and beyond 5% because of these projects. The limits we placed on ourselves, like they need to fit within the limits. And where that pressure would be applied, if say we approved the Audison feasibility study and there was a debt exclusion down the road, if it were to pass, great, like most of that money, we will have paid $190,000, nearly half of which will have been reimbursed. It wouldn't have been a big hit. And then you just take the rest of those feasibility study monies, you fold it into the 30 or whatever the debt would be. But if that debt exclusion vote failed and you have no excluded mechanism to pay for that 2.5 million, then there would be significant pressure at that time on the capital plan to fund those annual payments. So that's the sort of the risk with these feasibility studies if it didn't turn into a project in the long run.
Thank you. So this is not a question for now, but just something that I think a bunch of us are interested in for the Hardy electrification. So Julie, thanks very much for sending all those documents.
Yeah.
Those are helpful. The one that I'm looking at, which, has the sort of aerial photo of the town, it says Town of Arlington Electrification and Air Quality Master Plan. I think it would be helpful for the committee, there's a section there which compares in principle how much it costs to put these heat pumps in versus what it would in principle cost to replace with gas systems. And in the tables here, they're quite comparable, which is really counterintuitive to back of the envelope, sort of analysis by the committee. So not for now, but I wonder if you could ask someone or point us in the direction of getting a fairly thorough estimate of what a comparable gas project would cost. And that, I think, will help us make our decisions about, how much is the heat pump costing above what a gas would cost. I don't know the right person to ask, but maybe you know the right person to ask. Just like, what are the justifications for those little graphs that they have that show them being comparable when that's surprising to us?
Okay.
Thank you.
Charlie?
I have several questions. You have a time frame for when the Audison award might be? I mean, I think they talked the other night when the school committee was here about it being in excess of $100 million. I was a little surprised. I thought that would be, something on that order with a big bill, but apparently they get bigger these days. So there's a time frame here of, when the feasibility study gets done, when this gets submitted to the MSBA, and when the MSBA would turn around and give us an approval. How does that fit within the time limit on the bans?
So we can ban for up to 3 years. So we would have to have a debt exclusion vote probably in about a year to be able to have that before the bans expire.
So what's the probability of knowing what the cost is going to be and knowing that we're going to get the support from the MSBA in 3 years? That's not the history that we've had in the past with respect to the MSBA.
So, not sure I followed the first question, but my understanding is we would be getting our invitation into feasibility study for the Audison in roughly February of 2027. And that would put us on a timeline for appropriating full funding for that project. I believe it can be no sooner than July of 2028, based on how long the feasibility studies purport to take. So the ultimate vote on the actual construction project, though I haven't seen it fully mapped out, would be the earliest at the end of 2028, but perhaps more likely sometime in 2029.
So we also wouldn't borrow the funds for another year, right? So we start the fiscal year, we wouldn't borrow for a year from now for those band funds, for anything that we borrow.
Can somebody provide us with the timeline? I'd be interested in seeing that.
Sure.
I mean, I think it's a sort of a critical element, and the history that we've had with the elementary schools and with the high school, when we decided we want to do it, when we did the feasibility study, when we got the okay from the MSBA or get the prior one, SB something done. They tend to be fairly long term.
Mm-hmm.
So, and longer than the van window, I believe. Second thing is, Rebecca referred to this electrification study. I thank you very much for distributing that. That's really, I think I saw that the cost of the electrification project at the Hardy School is $13 million, according to what that study says.
So that study was about 2 years old, and yes, they had a range. Talia provided a range for electrification, anywhere from, I believe, 10 to 13 for that building, depending on what you choose, right? The point of the feasibility study is to see, would we consider geothermal? Would we consider air source heat pumps? Very different costs and, very different grant opportunities for those two items. But yes, I believe Hardy was in the $10 to $13 million range.
So somehow, if we, from some grant opportunities or some other federal programs which may or may not be there right now, we get down to this $4.5 million that's in the capital plan. That's a big jump between $4.5 million and $10 or $13 million. And I think that's one of the things that personally I'd like to see explained before we embark on this $375,000 study. And a corollary to what Rebecca's question was, is that in the capital budget, in the capital plan, there are 4 or 5 other schools earmarked for rooftop unit replacements. And the cost of those replacements are in general $300,000, $500,000. If you read the electrification master plan, all of these things are in the almost double-digit $10 million range or more. And I'm trying to get my head around why the town management is proposing something that's going to be, in today's dollars, $70 to $100 million for electrification, when there's alternative ways to deal with it. And if we have designs on moving to a certain technology because we think there are other reasons to justify it, why couldn't we wait until we renovate those buildings? In other words, the Hardy is a 1926 building. That's not going to be there forever. We are talking about the break-even point on these systems as being 30 years. So in theory, they outlast at least that building. It seems to me, given where we are, and from a strategic viewpoint as to how we manage the town's finances, that we would want to take these steps when we do major renovations to the building, or we use the $500,000 expenditure that you've already got in the capital plan. So what's the transition there? Because the capital budget is actually the town manager's capital budget.
So, I would say, so the Hardy School, where I think there's 10 rooftop units up there.
There's 8.
There's 10. Throw that out there. We'd be looking at like in-kind replacement, if we were to put them out, the last time we did one was in 2024, and I think it cost us maybe a little bit over $300,000 per unit. But the issue, obviously, the equipment right now is at end of life, so I don't know if we're going to be in a position to sort of wait for the next major renovation of the building. But what's unique about the Hardy School is those rooftop units aren't actually gas-fired units. They're not package units, right? It's a central heating plant. So there's, you know, 2 massive boilers, pumps, variable frequency drives, all the piping that's heating water, and that water is in coils in all of the rooftop units. So in looking at replacing the heating system at a school like the Hardy, it is not like many of the other schools where you're just replacing that terminal unit on the roof in kind, right? Like those aren't even, you know, gas powered. They're not fueled at the roof level. They're just essentially large air handling units. So you'd be looking at replacing not only all of the rooftop units, but piping, pumps, the boilers, everything down in the boiler room or mechanical room. So that's where I think the other millions of dollars in any event, whether you're going with gas or if you're putting in all that infrastructure in the boiler room and it's being fed from a geothermal loop, I think there's, you know, those costs are largely equivalent. But if you were to go to a geothermal program, well, in that instance, instead of powering your boilers with the 2, you know, the big gas main that's there, you'd be having to put in a geothermal well field and an extra, you know, pump to move the glycol from outside to inside. So like that's where the added cost would be in that particular instance for like an electrified building.
I'd like to add that Hardy has actually had quite a bit of capital focus in the capital plan. So we had roof replacement, we've got 2.2 million for windows and masonry. So there has already been quite a bit of envelope work done at Hardy. I believe we're also getting solar, or we have.
We've already installed solar.
Installed solar at Hardy as well. So, you know, so you're right, the building does need work and we are investing in that work right now.
It's those envelope investments that put the town into a position to qualify for the MSBA's program that would then reimburse the, you know, the effective rate should be somewhere between 44 and 45% of the project costs, but only if we went the way of electrification, right? If we just do in-kind replacement of all equipment as it exists, we would not have qualified for the program. And similarly, if some of those envelope improvements had not been made, we would not have qualified for the MSBA program. So it's the
The Hardy was rebuilt in about 2000, right?
Yeah, I think it started in like late '99 maybe, and then proceeded.
And so wasn't the boiler and the system entirely replaced when that renovation took place?
Yeah, so some of the equipment, the manufacture date is right around like just shy of 2000.
Yeah. And that, all that equipment is now obsolete or dead or?
Only one piece of equipment has died entirely. We've had to replace some pumps. There's been one rooftop unit that had to get replaced. There is 2 existing pieces of equipment up there that are obsolete insofar as they have the old R22 refrigerant, which you can't use anymore, so they will not be repairable. But yeah, I mean, much of that equipment started experiencing failures prior to the pandemic, right? Most of it had probably a 20-year lifespan, so we're to an extent on borrowed time.
So do we have an analysis of that somewhere? Well, what Rebecca was referring to is comparable costs, You know,
Yeah.
what are we looking at?
To just replace everything as it exists
Well,
today.
I mean, somebody must have looked at that, right?
So that study is what we had. You know, that study is what we got 2 years ago. It was brought before the Capital Planning Committee. The response by Capital Planning at the time 2 years ago was, that's a lot of money. You know, we can't bear $10 million for electrifying a school. You know, that we were, you know, like shocked by that 2 years ago. Well, Talia has done a lot of work to find other funding sources, to be able to tap into grants. I mean, you said, why not wait, Charlie? If we wait, we're not gonna be able to take advantage of these grants. So that is the study, Rebecca, that is the information that we were provided, that someone had done quite a bit of research to show that yes, it could be comparable, like replacement, but now we've got some other opportunities, which I know I also sent this high level budget to all of you, I believe, right? And that kind of shows you the complication right now without the feasibility study, because there is such a wide array of possibilities in terms of what this could cost us. And capital planning, right now, we're just looking at the feasibility study. So that's the only thing that we are contemplating paying for in 27. That said, the outcome of the feasibility study could possibly be, it's gonna cost $10 million. And the answer might be, okay, well, again, we don't know that we can afford that. So, you know, I don't think that it's sort of a like, we do the feasibility and so we're going to do that plan. I think the point is to get that plan, to be able to tell us what it's actually gonna cost. And the feasibility study would also be, right, reimbursed to some extent?
Reimbursed fully at your effective reimbursement rate, which in 26 we're around 44 or 45%. And interestingly, even if you were to not move forward with a project, the MSBA's policy is to still reimburse all feasibility study costs. But I think the question about that 2023 analysis that was done was a very high level with a specific goal of creating a roadmap for electrifying the town's buildings. I think what we're needing now, and perhaps it would result from this feasibility study, like it looks at the ways to potentially introduce heat pumps into the building, but we need a way of understanding what would the cost be if we still had to replace everything, but we didn't go with heat pumps. And that's sort of the delta you'd look at. And we could probably estimate like, okay, if we know what a unit price is for each of those boilers and the pumps and the VFDs and the rooftop units as they exist, using similar projects we've done, could probably put something together at a high level to say like, well, electrification or MSBA aside, like we know this equipment is at end of life, and if we were to just go it on our own and replace it as closely as possible to what it exists now, like how many millions is that going to cost?
Do we have that number?
We don't have that currently, no.
That would be part of the feasibility study.
Yes, or it's something I honestly think like going by, like, here's how many rooftop units, here's the tonnage of those rooftop units. We buy rooftop units every year. We can say, geez, you know, that's likely to be a $400,000 unit, $300,000 unit. Okay, 2 boilers of this size, I think each one of those is gonna
The
cost.
market doesn't say that they're $400,000 a piece. Market prices for those, I mean, they're 20-ton units, right?
Now, some of them are not 20-ton units, they're smaller than that. And we pay like $375. So there's like the cost of the unit and then what we're paying in prevailing wages for installing, overhead, profit, markup.
Do we have a comparable analysis of what other cities and towns have paid for these rooftop units?
I mean, we know what we've paid just on our public bids based on like projects that we've done recently. I think we've replaced a rooftop unit at the Hardy that has failed in recent memory, and I can figure out what size that was and what was the bid price for it, and that was a couple of years ago, so presumably it would be higher now. We do have at least one data point local to us for that particular building.
Okay, we have other people's questions, Alta.
Okay, so right now the building is heated with natural gas. And we've got 2 boilers down there. So I think it would be very helpful, because obviously the feasibility study is sort of aiming us towards electrification. The carrot is that if it costs $10 million, we could get 44% back from MSBA. If we go with natural gas and just redo what we have, we're not gonna get a reimbursement.
At all.
Okay, but I think it would be good along with that if a parallel quick study was done, even, by DPW or whoever, facilities, of how much would it cost to just redo natural gas.
Annie?
Okay, so are we currently cooling the Hardy, air conditioning there?
Only in the library, nurses suite, and front office.
And how are we doing that? Are we doing that through those rooftop units in some way?
Yes,
Okay.
they have
So
a
maybe-
what's called a DX, or a direct expansion cooling package with R22 like local refrigerant tied in.
But only some, like not all of the units, obviously, because it's not.
No, it's like only serving that very front portion of the building with the
one unit.
offices. Yeah.
Okay, so we can't just replace the system as is, we have to replace the system plus cooling, correct?
Yeah, anytime we sort of do large HVAC projects in schools now, we try to introduce cooling so that we don't have the heat-related closures.
Alright, and then again, we have a solar array on top of the building at Hardy.
Mhm.
And do we have any idea how much of the electricity the building uses is provided by that solar array, including net metering credits? Like how much of our bill is offset?
So that array was just installed.
So
The
we
credits
don't
aren't
know.
fully approved to go live yet.
Do we have an estimate on what a dent it's gonna make in the electric bill?
We
Like I know
do.
what the estimate was when we put them online.
Yeah, I don't have that number immediately available. But yes, like the solar vendor has to prepare that for when we're submitting for our smart incentive credits, so.
Okay, and when you do a solar array on a school building, is it similar to the solar array on my house, where if my solar panels don't meet a certain predicted level of electricity production every year, I get a credit, I get money back? Or is that not in your deal?
I'm not aware of that being in our deal. I'd have to really scour the PPA for that.
And obviously the building doesn't use as much electricity in July as it does in January in terms of just general electricity use, because it's not as occupied, correct?
Correct.
So you'd be getting more net metering credit in the summer from the solar panels, yada, yada.
It'd be peak production for them.
Alright, so it seems to me like we need the feasibility study to tell us what the cheapest possible way to do this is, modulo funds from other sources regardless. And then somewhere in that feasibility study, we get something that tells us the relative operating costs, because that solar array is not gonna pay for the gas bill.
Okay, Rebecca and then Paul, and then we're gonna move on.
Yes, thank you.
Paul?
Just one question.
Oh, a little louder, please.
I'm sorry. What is the cost of the Hardy feasibility study? And how much will get reimbursed by MSBA?
So I think, is it in for 380,000?
385.
385, reimbursable at roughly 44%. So we authorize and appropriate the full amount, we'll get that reimbursed. And the one thing I would add is we can't bank on it yet, but we've actually are expecting an earmark through a supplemental budget from our legislators from the millionaire tax, right, for one of the education uses. And they were interested in submitting something, likely six figures, to help with the town's share of the feasibility study. So we're budgeting for the full amount here, but we do hope to, if this were to move forward, receive other funds that could be put towards this to lower the actual cost to the community for the feasibility study.
All right, moving on.
375, excuse me.
Moving on to Article 69, the Transportation Infrastructure Fund. What is the intent of those?
The intent, again, this year, as it has been the last few years, would be to support operational costs associated with Blue Bike so that we don't have to spend any general fund dollars on that program. I will note as a bit of an aside, I'm going to go to the State House tomorrow to meet with the Speaker of the House as well as the Chair of Ways and Means. The Transportation Infrastructure Fund is actually set to expire. Next year would be the last unless the legislature authorize its continuation of receiving those monies from Uber, Lyft, and other ride-hailing companies. So that's something that is set to expire via the sunset provision. So a number of us representing different municipalities are going to go advocate for that to be reinstituted. Right, that's been an additional $40,000+ a year for the municipality, and we hate to see it go away.
Do we have a contract with Blue Bikes?
Not at present. It's being renegotiated through a new cooperative procurement being done by Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And what I'm hearing, though I haven't seen it yet, is that it's going to be far more favorable to municipalities and put us in sort of a better position to be sharing in some of the benefits of the system that we otherwise haven't been able to share.
How much is the amount of money? Do you have that?
Yeah.
It's usually
I do.
between 30 and 40.
It's $36,140.80.
Is Blue Bikes, you know, we've been supporting them now for many years. Is Blue Bikes at some point in the future going to be able to sustain itself without public support?
We're hopeful that under the new contract that I'm alluding to, that it would. And we have been doing our part to shed what has been the lion's share of our operational costs, where we initially deployed all of the stations on street and then had to pay to have them removed and redeployed and stored every year. So the lion's share of our operational costs were a result of what I hate to call a rushed deployment to get them out, but we have been actively trying to get them situated in all off-street locations so that we wouldn't have to remove them during the winter, because that was the lion's share of our costs.
Thank you.
Other questions on the Transportation Infrastructure Fund? All right, moving on. Private way revolving funds, anybody this year?
This year, under that warrant article, the Kelwin Manor Association has approached the town about doing a betterment, and therefore this warrant article was adjusted slightly to allow the town to borrow funds. They are projecting a $1.5 million project. Obviously, when we've seeded the private way repair revolving fund in prior years, it's always been $50,000 or $100,000, and we use our own money and then get paid back over 5 years. But for a project of that magnitude, because they reached critical mass, they said we can't fund that internally. So what we're seeking is authorization to borrow the full project cost, but we would ultimately only borrow that which the residents choose not to pay up front. So for their ballots, we put a non-binding question. So every resident that returned a ballot told us if they planned on having it assessed on their taxes or if they planned on paying it up front and how much, so that we could start to project what the actual borrowing might look like. But we would then pursue those funds with our annual borrowing with the rest of our capital plan. And our bylaw requires the interest cost plus 2% sort of administrative burden for the town having conducted the issuance be the interest rate charged to impacted residents.
So would town meeting be voting on a dollar certain?
$1 certain, yes.
And you'll have,
Is it
Yeah.
two-thirds vote?
where,
Yes, because it's authorizing. Yeah, that number it's already in the final votes and comments for the select board to consider on Monday. It's 1.5 something, but the number is immediately available.
Questions on that, Annie and Sophie?
All right, so maybe this is a silly question. If somebody chooses to use the private ways revolving fund to repave their street, they have to use a contractor that we approve?
Insofar as that a contractor has to be on our approved contractor list, which
Yeah,
means
that's what I mean.
they've given us a copy of insurance and bond, but really they can choose and do choose anyone. Like they go out and get the prices separately. And occasionally they get them prices from contractors that the town uses, but then they may get it from contractors that we don't use.
Okay. And are they allowed to repave the street using anybody they want? They're not running money through the private way revolving fund, or do they have to use someone from that same list?
You would still, in order to get a street occupancy permit from the town, have to demonstrate that you're using a contractor on our approved contractor list. We need to make sure you're appropriately bonded because you could damage so many things in the right of way in terms of infrastructure.
Sophie?
Two questions. First, so when somebody decides to use the revolving funds money, is there interest or, I mean, if we're going out as a town and borrowing, are we passing on the interest to them?
Yeah, so the actual interest cost plus 2%.
Plus 2%, okay. And then my second question, and I think I had asked this a few years ago, but I don't remember what the answer is. Why, I understand we charge for repaving private streets, but we don't charge for snow plowing private streets. Is there a reason that we do it for free? Knowing that I live with a private street, so I'm shooting myself in the foot, but.
You're welcome to make a contribution.
But it just like when we're looking for money.
You'd be the only private way resident that didn't tell me that you pay the same taxes as everyone else and deserve the same services. Because it's one of the few services that we can provide based on the local adoption statute that we did pursue that doesn't require us to recoup those costs. It's considered a public good or public benefit. So it's only the maintenance.
It doesn't require us, but we could as a town choose to charge for that or not?
I don't think there's anything that would I don't think there's anything that would preclude us from doing it, but if residents then said like, we don't want to do it and we don't want you to do it, we would probably still have to do it for public safety reasons. And maybe they didn't agree to it, but I don't think we could then go make a special assessment on them.
Sophie?
I was gonna make that point, it's a public safety.
Right, but we can still charge them. Private is private, in some areas they don't, like if you don't, other small towns in Massachusetts, they don't want anybody coming on their private way, they don't, can't, technically.
Carolyn?
Well, I think you did, Marion and Elmhurst, I think you did Elmhurst, so a bus could safely go up and down it a couple of years ago. And then charged, probably put it on a couple tenants or a couple owners who refused to pay, onto their lead or something. Because suddenly you did Elmhurst.
Elmhurst?
Paved it, which is down, paved out.
Yeah, I'm not sure it was us that paved it.
Interesting.
All right, moving on, Article 80, 51 Grove Street building repairs. What is the status of that? Where are we getting money?
Yeah, we would be looking to appropriate $100,000 from the municipal building insurance fund.
A trust fund that exists for essentially exactly this purpose. So we are likely to spend based on the emergency response and the cost of all the repairs. Right now, the estimate is about $175,000. Our deductible is $100,000. So what we would be pursuing under this warrant article is the $100,000 from the municipal building insurance trust fund to cover that deductible payment.
Is that a 2/3 vote too?
It's coming from a trust fund?
I don't know, I'll see.
Yeah, we'd have to verify that.
Any questions on Charlie and Carolyn?
What's the balance in the municipal insurance trust fund right now?
What is it, 700,
Between 700 and 800.
800,000? Yeah.
And so we're getting a 8% interest or 6% interest?
Oh, probably about, no, yeah, I would say it's closer to, yeah, between 3 and 4.
Before.
Mhm.
So, are we gonna start putting money back into the fund if we're taking money out? We haven't, I don't think we put
We
money-
haven't, we've never touched, I mean, we haven't touched it, so we could consider it, but at this point, this has been, we've tried to research prior use, and essentially we've been using it for an offset to the insurance fund. We offset the insurance budget about $20,000, but that's been the primary use, but we could consider it if we felt like it was important to replenish.
We did spend some money from there.
Did we?
5 or 10 years ago. I can't remember there was some flood damage that we
Okay.
recovered, out of that.
Carolyn?
So is this because of all of the new buildings in that area and the fact that the brook runs through it, that the insurance rate has gone up, or is this just? Or is this just something?
No, we had
Oh,
A fire.
no, we had a fire.
Oh, we have that fire, that's right.
And the large part of the damage is actually, the fire was on an upper level. And it was the water from firefighting activities that flooded the main electrical switchgear for the building. So, if it had been in a ground floor fire, no issues. Upper floor fire, significant costly issues because it got into the electrical infrastructure.
Sorry, wasn't paying attention.
That's right.
All right, Article 82, local option taxes, any?
No, nothing available to us this year.
And I think that covers everything. Questions, anyone have additional questions? Charlie?
What are we gonna do about that house up on Turkey Hill there?
Mount Tavola.
Oh, Mount Tavola, I'm sorry, Mount
Turkey Hill's
Tavola.
the other way.
Yeah, Mount Tavola.
That's a very good question that I don't have a good answer for.
I got a member of my family in the North End who could take care of it.
The only thing I firmly planted my foot down was I'm no longer gonna be a single family landlord. Like the rent we were collecting wouldn't cover the repairs we'd be getting called about weekly, given the condition of the property. So like, I'd rather have no one in there. It's more of a liability, but I know that, planning helped with the study. I don't think it necessarily resulted in a clear-cut path forward. I think there was a lot of conflicting interests about what the best use of that parcel was.
Did we give it to the housing authority?
I don't think in its current condition, it had much use or value to them.
Could we build a school there?
it's not very big.
New middle school.
Alan, did you have other questions?
No. That was my question.
All right, Michael?
The old DAV building on Mass Ave. Status?
It hasn't been ours for the better part of a decade. We sold it.
Development plan is where?
I believe that developer was to provide an update to the redevelopment board either this week, I think potentially this week, so stay tuned. I don't get those updates directly as part of the special permit. They have to appear to the redevelopment board and provide status updates.
David?
I know that's been before the redevelopment board in the last few years, 3 times. And they want to put a hotel there.
Correct. People aren't really financing new hotels these days.
Hotel.
Yeah.
And the fellow, I personally know the fellow that owned, in fact, we all do, because he was a town official.
Yeah.
And he's kind of frustrated with the process, so he's backing off, just sitting.
Mhm.
So that's where the DAV is.
Yeah,
But he owns the building next door too.
yeah, if I had to venture a guess, I suspect the owner actually wants to build something different than what was originally proposed and approved.
Latowski?
I had some thought, just Malcoboa House, is if we can't give it to the housing authority and it requires too much work in order to rent out, should we just tear the thing down, the garage, the driveway, and restore it to its natural Malcoboa way?
I think that is a viable option, and it just becomes a bit of a, I don't know what you call it, like an overlook park or something of that nature. But there are some fairly significant historic interests with respect to the structure that people were looking to preserve and maintain.
There've been a number of public meetings I could talk to you about.
Heated.
Yeah.
Heated public meetings.
Yeah. Other questions for the manager? All right, 3 minutes. Grant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't really have a question, but I wasn't here the last time you guys were here, and I did want to commend you, congratulate you on the trash conversion.
Thank you.
You did a very good job on that. It's not an easy thing to do, to get all these people to do that. You know, that's not gonna go perfect. And the timing was incredible. Had it not been on that, you know, on that day, we would probably still be wondering where our trash is. So again, kudos, job well done on that.
I greatly appreciate that, thank you. And we actually, my biggest fear was how we would fare during the winter. And this winter certainly gave us a test. And I saw those trucks plucking bins that were, you know, cockeyed on top of a 4-foot snowbank. And I'm like, I didn't think this would work. I thought everyone was gonna be putting them in the street and like, that would be the time it would fail. But, you know, we made it through this winter.
You know, those drivers would just get out of the truck when they had to.
They did that.
Yeah.
They wanted to do a good job, which is great. That's contrasted to the other ones.
Yeah, fair point.
Well, all right, so thank you, Jim, thank you, Julie, thank you, Christine. This has been very informative. We appreciate you coming and spending all this time with us. And we'll keep talking. Yep. Great, thank you very much. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
All right, we don't have much time to do anything else.
Adjourn the meeting.
There's a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All right, all in favor? Aye.